curse is uttered. A vow is broken. A life is growing. But what happens if that life is not a miracle, but a death sentence for the mother? Today, we tell you the story of a woman named Elena. About distorted faith. About a child who was never born as a miracle, but as the result of a mistake, a curse uttered by the husband. And about how a mother fights to reclaim her child's soul, from the thing lurking between the earth and the decay of faith. Hello, dear listeners, you are listening to Whisper Horror Channel. Here, every whisper carries a buried truth. If you feel a chill down your spine, please press like. If you think someone should know this story, share it with them. And if you want to continue exploring the shadows that have never been told, subscribe and turn on notifications. Comment below, do you believe that a curse can live longer than time itself? The year is 1912. The south side of Chicago, where dark alleys overlap like dead veins beneath the rough crust of a society moving madly. Coal factories screamed day and night. Immigrants lived crowded in damp slums, where the smell of coal, sweat, and sin mingled in every layer of peeling paint on the walls. In the middle of this maze was a dilapidated row of tenements. House number 53, the last room on the second-floor hallway, where light entered for exactly 1 hour every morning. An immigrant Italian couple lived there, Giovanni and Elena Ricci. Giovanni used to be a blacksmith, but after an accident that crushed his right index finger, he switched to working as a steam engineer in the basement of Hull House. The man was thin. His skin darkened by smoke and fire, his eyes always squinted as if doubting the whole world. He did not believe in God. Did not believe in anything but himself and the steel hands that once lifted red-hot furnaces. Elena, conversely, was a small woman, always wearing a high-necked blouse and a silver crucifix around her neck. Her voice was soft, her eyes deep. Her hands always holding an old rosary, the only thing she brought from her hometown of Naples. Elena believed in faith absolutely. As if the world would crack if she stopped praying for just one morning. Their rented room was never large enough for the two of them. Giovanni often returned late. The smell of machine oil and cigarette smoke clinging to his clothes. Elena, after 2 miscarriages, spent most of her time in the room, embroidering and pasting holy pictures on the walls. Every time she did that, Giovanni would rip them down, stuff them into the fireplace, and watch them burn like garbage. "Do you think these things will save us?" Giovanni once yelled, throwing a painting of the Virgin Mary onto the floor. Elena did not reply. She only knelt down, picked up the torn painting, and quietly pasted it back together with bread glue. Then one evening, as the pale yellow light shone through the semicircular window, Elena announced she was pregnant again. The 3rd time. Giovanni did not look at her. He poured more wine into his cup, drinking it down in one gulp. Elena stood, her hands wrapped around her belly, her eyes full of worry. "This time, I believe God will protect the baby." The silence stretched like a shadow dragged across the floor. Then Giovanni's voice burst out, dryly. "Your God let the other 2 die. If you keep pasting those stupid holy things on the wall, the next one won't be human. It will be a demon." The curse was uttered like a stone falling into a deep well. No one knew where it hit the bottom. Elena stood frozen. The cold from the window frame seemed to penetrate straight into her skin. Giovanni left in the night. Elena stayed behind. Her hands still placed on her belly, as if she was trying to shield the small life from a darkness that had just slithered between the layers of her flesh. That night, for the first time, Elena dreamed of a long road, covered in dust and ashes. A creature walking on 4 legs, its back hunched, its face wrinkled with eyes that had no pupils. It crawled along the wall of her uterus, whispering in a non-human tongue. She woke up drenched in sweat and breathing heavily. But inside, the child was still there. Strong. She felt the pulse, not just of its heart, but of something deeper, like a sound echoing from the earth. Elena did not tell anyone about the dream. She continued to pray, continued to paste holy pictures. This time the Pietà, the Virgin Mary holding the body of Christ, her gaze not of sorrow but of peace. Giovanni did not touch that painting again. He just looked at it whenever he passed by, as if fearing his hand would be burned if he touched it. But a curse, once uttered, does not need a listener to exist. It only needs a dwelling place. And room 53, second floor, South Chicago, was ready for it. Elena counted each day by touching the engraved holy metal. Each bead was a small anchor to keep her tied to reality, where her body gradually changed in an unnamed way. The fetus developed normally, according to the doctor. No deformities. No abnormal signs. But Elena knew well. There was something inside her moving not according to the normal rhythm of a fetus's life. It did not kick, did not turn, did not squirm like the 2 children she had lost. It slithered. Slowly. Consciously. Elena felt it when it changed position, not to find comfort, but as if choosing a corner in her body to inhabit. A dark area, gloomier than the rest. Elena's face became paler day by day. Her eyes sunken, cheekbones prominent. But there was something bright in her eyes, not the light of life, but the light of someone standing at the edge of an abyss and still choosing to step forward. She began pasting holy pictures again. Not in the middle of the room like before, but in dark corners. Under the bed, behind the stove, inside the linen closet. Tiny pictures printed on rice paper, with serrated edges like postage stamps. A few of them began to discolor quickly. The image edges blurred, and the faces of the saints, distorted. Elena did not tell anyone. She no longer went to church. People told her she was weak and needed rest. She whispered prayers in the room, eyes closed, hands placed on her belly, as if sending a silent message to the life inside her body. Don't let them call you a demon. I am here. Whatever you are, I will keep you. Then strange things began to happen. First was the cradle. A neighbor brought it over, saying it was a gift from the Italian community at Hull House. Elena had never told anyone about the pregnancy. But the woman, her face pale, her hands dry and thin, just stood at the doorway with the dark walnut cradle. You will need it. Soon. The cradle was empty. But that night, Elena heard a lullaby coming from it. The words were unclear. The melody was dark, ancient. As if a mother who had died a century ago was whispering through the gaps in the wood. She turned on the light, shining it around the room. No one was there. But the cradle was gently rocking. Rhythmically, not matching the direction of the wind. Elena dragged the cradle into the old closet and locked it. But on the following nights, she still heard that lullaby. Sometimes near. Sometimes far. Once it echoed from behind the neighbor's wall. Once from inside her own belly. Then came the neighbors. They visited Elena more often. People who had never looked up to greet her in the hallway before. Now, they brought candles, small statues, pictures of the Virgin Mary, but all were distorted. A statue of Mary with a chipped left eye. A painting of Jesus with two unusually wide, long hands extending past his knees. A holy medal with a circular spiral mark instead of a crucifix at the end of the chain, like an ancient symbol. They never stayed long. They just left those objects and spoke very softly. Almost whispering. Everything will fall into place. We just need to prepare. You're doing very well. Very well. Elena felt her room changing. Not the walls, not the furniture. But the air. As if it was thickening, condensing, with a texture like soft mud. Every time she breathed, she had to use more strength. Every time she prayed, the sound resonated as if wrapped in thick fabric. Unable to penetrate the heavy air around her. She began to see illusions in the mirror. Not her reflection, but behind her, a human shadow, very faint, sometimes standing, sometimes crawling. Black eyes, large and bulging, unblinking. Once, Elena turned around quickly, but there was nothing. She held the crucifix against the mirror. Instead of reflecting the shape of the cross, the mirror surface suddenly blurred like ink bleeding backward. She could no longer sleep soundly. The dreams were fragmented. One dream repeated itself. She was walking down a long hallway with no windows, her belly heavy. With every step, the floor groaned like a woman in labor. At the end of the hallway was a room with only an empty cradle. When she entered, the child lying in it turned its head to look. It had no eyes. Only two empty sockets dripping blood. But it still smiled. The next morning, Elena found dried blood on her pillow, even though her pregnancy was stable. And on the sheet, a very long fingernail mark clawed across her abdomen while she slept. She went to see a doctor. The doctor said there was nothing unusual. But the nurse, a young woman, quickly glanced at Elena and turned away. Elena saw the girl holding a silver medal in her pocket, gripping it tightly. That night, Elena sat on the floor of the room, not sleeping. She did not read scripture. Did not pray. She only whispered, "If there is something inside you, please, don't take you away from me. Don't turn you into something else. I beg you." And from her belly, a first kick appeared. But not like a normal fetus, rather a strong push straight up to her chest. As if a small arm had propped itself up from inside to assert its presence. Elena raised her head, eyes wide open. She was not afraid. She whispered, "You are listening to me. I know. So listen carefully. I will not let anyone take you away. Even if they say you are a demon, a deformity, whatever. I am your mother. I will keep you with my own blood if necessary." On the small altar in the corner of the room, the painting of the Virgin Mary began to blur. But this time not distorted. Instead, blood seeped from both eyes. Elena stood up. Her eyes glowed like fire burning in the mist. And behind her, in the uncovered mirror, the shadow quietly disappeared into the darkness. The day of labor arrived like a sudden knock on a door that had been unopened for too long. It was a dry October night, so dry that even the wind was reluctant to blow. The slum was silent as if someone had muffled all sounds, only reserving the noise for one thing, birth. Elena was mentally prepared for pain, but not the kind of pain she had experienced before. The first contraction came from below her navel, not just tightening but twisting, as if the child inside was finding its own way out. She did not cry out, only grit her teeth enduring the pain, gripping the bed frame until her hands bled. The midwife called was Mrs. Rachel, a middle-aged black woman living around the corner near Hull House. She had helped many women in the area give birth, with skills better than any doctor. But when she walked into the room, just placing her hand on Elena's belly, she froze. "This doesn't feel right." Elena looked at her, saying nothing. But her eyes were red, her hand still on the silver medal. "My child is coming. It just needs a path." The second contraction was stronger, like a blade snapping the spine in half. Elena doubled over, screaming for the first time after months of silence. Mrs. Rachel prepared towels and hot water, but her hands trembled. She took out the small crucifix she carried, placing it in Elena's hand. At that moment, the crucifix became scorching hot as if it had been forged. "What are you holding inside you?" she mumbled. Then, it happened. The groaning sound was not from Elena, but from the floor. Beneath the old wooden floorboards, somewhere in the earth, there were scratching sounds, hissing rhythmically like nails scraping against stone. The smell of damp earth and metal gradually spread throughout the room, seeping into every breath. Mrs. Rachel's face turned pale. She stood up abruptly, backing toward the door. "I'm sorry. I can't." "Don't go," Elena screamed. "It's coming." But Mrs. Rachel had fled. The door slammed shut. It locked itself. No one knew why. Elena was alone. She lay sideways, curled up, gripping the bedsheet. Her eyes blurred, but remained wide open, staring at the ceiling where there were spiderweb-like cracks. She felt blood seeping onto her thighs. She felt her body being split apart, not by pain, but by a force greater than life itself. Then, a child's voice echoed. But not crying. Rather a faint, long hiss, like the sound of someone who has been lying underground for too long. She looked down. The baby lay there. Not exactly deformed, but also not normal. Its hands were long, fingers slender and pointed more than any child's. Its eyes were not open, but the eyelids trembled slightly as if something was waiting to burst out. It did not cry. But Elena did not cry either. She just looked and whispered, "I'm here." She wrapped it in the cream-colored wool shawl she had knitted for the past 3 months. Not to keep it warm, but to keep its soul contained. Her hands trembled, but not from fear, rather because for the first time, she understood, she had given birth to something that did not follow the laws of creation. But it was still her child. The baby stirred. For a moment, a cold aura radiated from it, causing the holy picture nearby to crack open. But Elena still held it tight, embracing it. The room was silent, until the sound echoed again, from under the floor. A knocking sound. Then a tapping sound. Slowly. As if someone, or something, was knocking from the other side. Elena closed her eyes. She held her child tightly to her chest. And for the first time, in that night, she began to sing a lullaby. An old lullaby, wordless, only with rhythm and melody, a tune her mother had sung to her the night her father died. And the baby, for the first time, made a sound like breathing. gentle, but human. A wind blew in through the window gap. The curtain swayed gently. Outside, there were no stars. Only a black sky, as if God had turned away. But in Elena's heart, there was a glimmer of light. Although fragile, very fragile. The hiss from underground did not stop immediately on the night Elena gave birth. It became a vague background rhythm in the fitful sleep. In the wind howling through the window gaps and the creaking of the old wooden stairs. Every night, after rocking the child to sleep, Elena still sat motionless, her back against the wall. Her eyes fixed on the floor as if waiting. But what she did not expect was, those sounds were no longer limited to the four walls of the room. 3 days after the birth, she heard crying echoing from the basement of Hull House. Not clear, not persistent, but fleeting, like a short echo from the other side of the wall. The strange thing was, others also heard it. A neighbor boy told his mother that he dreamed of a child locked in the brick partition. An old woman living downstairs said she saw a small hand waving from under the drain when she flushed the toilet. Elena began to feel the atmosphere in the slum becoming denser. The glances were hurried, the conversations fragmented. No one dared to say anything clearly, but they began to avoid her. The child in Elena's arms, she named him Isaac, still did not open his eyes. Every time she changed his diaper, he made strange sounds, not gurgling, but sounds like writing. As if his throat emitted something with a shape. She felt a sharp pain in her chest every time she heard it, as if someone was carving letters onto her ribs with an iron nail. She did not take Isaac to the church for baptism. Not because she had abandoned God, but because she was afraid those people would look into her child's eyes and see something unsalvageable. But even though she kept the child in the room, even though no one entered, the curse still found a way to spread. Children in the neighborhood began sleepwalking. Some walked out into the street in the middle of the night, eyes wide open, mumbling, "The child with no eyes is coming." Others drew on their bedroom walls with charcoal. Concentric circles, exactly the symbol on the back of Elena's medal, which she had never shown anyone. One morning, a statue of the Virgin Mary in the Hull House prayer room was found gradually blackening from the hands down. The manager thought it was mold, but when scraped, they found the mold smelled of dried blood. The press did not report it. The police did not investigate. But rumors began to spread like alcohol vapor in a dark room. A woman gave birth to something that was not human. A curse was returning. A gate that had been sealed was gradually opening. Elena only knew how to keep Isaac close to her. She sang lullabies to him every night. Wordless, ancient songs. Melodies she had never learned, but that emerged in her memory as if placed there before she was born. And in the quietest nights, when Isaac lay still in the cradle, Elena saw him smile. Not the smile of a newborn, but a smile with memory. She did not know whether to be afraid, or to hope. October 2025. Hull House had become a semi-official survey site for universities specializing in social history and ethnography. For a research project on 20th-century immigrant communities, a group of final-year students from Loyola University was allowed to film a documentary for 2 weeks. In the group was a person named Harper, an anthropology student, originally from Pennsylvania. With gray eyes, short hair, and thin metal-rimmed glasses. She did not believe in ghosts. She believed in cultural heritage, folk myths, and the influence of history on community memory. When her group members whispered about the night cries in Hull House, Harper just smiled. If anything exists here, it is the consequence of cultural suppression and poverty. Not ghosts, she said. During the first survey, Harper discovered an old wooden door behind a bookshelf in the basement. There was no note in the structural diagram. The door was sealed with 4 layers of wood and nailed, and painted with the red word "void," possibly a temporary city seal from decades ago. She returned to report to the group. But that evening no one dared to follow her back down to the basement. So Harper went alone. In the flashlight beam, the wooden door did not move. But there was a black stain next to it, spreading out like dark dead tree roots clinging to the concrete floor. Harper took a photo, but the first photo file was corrupted. The second shot was captured, but there was a detail she did not notice. Reflected in a puddle nearby was the shadow of a woman standing and watching from the stairs behind her. Harper returned to her room to edit the video and splice the clips, not realizing that detail. But that night, she dreamed. In the dream, there was a woman wearing a dull brown dress, holding a silver medal, standing motionless in an empty room. Her face was sunken, her eyes empty. She said nothing. She only pointed to the empty cradle in the corner of the room. The cradle gently rocked, and a hissing sound began to echo from behind Harper. She woke up at 3:17 a.m. unsure whether it was from the cold or if someone had just called her name in a discordant voice. At the same time, Mrs. Mabel, the elderly neighbor living next to Hull House, who used to be a nurse when she was young, began telling the youngest cameraman in the group about an old story that she was never allowed to tell. I used to hear a lullaby coming from the basement. I was young then, just over 20. One night on duty, I thought someone had secretly turned on a record player. But no. It was regular. The rhythm of the lullaby was not like modern people. It made me feel like kneeling down. Not out of fear, but because of sorrow. The cameraman turned on the recorder. But when he played the recording back, Mrs. Mabel's voice was distorted, stretched out, and in the middle. A faint sound of a child laughing interrupted, even though they confirmed no one else was in the room besides the two of them. After that day, Harper began to suffer from insomnia. She often left the survey group to wander alone in the basement. When asked, she replied that she felt this place was trying to tell her something. Harper started drawing. In her notebook, on napkins, even on the inside of her jacket, spiral shapes, ancient symbols of unknown systems, and the image of an empty cradle that kept repeating. During the last time the group stayed at Hull House, Harper looked straight into the camera and said, "I don't believe in demons. But I believe that a mother's pain can be strong enough to create something that exists beyond time. And if we ignore it, it will find someone else to tell its story." The camera broke at the 7-second mark right after that sentence. And the next morning, Harper disappeared from the hotel room. All she left behind was a small piece of paper, written in red pencil. The child doesn't need to be saved. The child needs to be heard. And in the last clip saved on the laptop, in a shaky frame, was a scene of Harper staring intently at an empty wooden cradle, placed right in the center of the Hull House basement. No one in the student group knew exactly who first unlatched the sealed basement door. Harper had disappeared. The photos saved on the hard drive did not clearly show her picking the lock. But what was clear was, when the remaining group returned to Hull House on the last day to retrieve their equipment, the door was wide open. no one took the blame. But no one denied the strange attraction the door exuded. As if there was a magnetic field that made the heart beat irregularly whenever someone approached it. The door was open. And inside was a perfect darkness. No light could reach the bottom, although they tried. The cameraman named Davis was the first to step inside. He brought a handheld camera and an infrared microphone. The others, only 3 remaining in the group, stood outside, worried. Davis lost contact after 3 minutes. He did not scream or panic. Only his voice gradually became faint, then disappeared as if the space was absorbing the sound. The last footage from Davis's camera was an image of a brick hallway, with traces of scraped murals on both sides of the wall. One of them, visible for a few frames, was a painting of a woman holding a small body, half human, half beast, wrapped in a blanket. But what chilled everyone was the writing above the painting: "Deliverance must begin in silence." Another female student, Lauren, after watching that video, began to cry. She said she dreamed of that exact scene last night, even though she had never been down to the basement. In the dream, she stood next to Elena, the woman in the painting, and heard a lullaby repeating like a magical chant. Lauren did not return to Hull House after that day. One of the last remaining members of the group decided to go down to the basement with a shoulder-mounted camera and live stream. But the live stream only lasted 2 minutes and 14 seconds before the signal completely distorted. In that segment, viewers heard the sound of howling wind, although there was no ventilation. The sound of a newborn crying, followed by a woman whispering in an old Southern American accent. A very short laugh, described by sound experts as lacking the vibration of human vocal cords. Since that day, Hull House was sealed off by local authorities again. But not for supernatural reasons, but because people reported missing persons. Not only Harper and Davis, but also a building security guard did not return home. The media reported the incident as a civil investigation. But in the small community around Hull House, rumors spread faster than the newspapers. Some people said they saw light coming from the basement window, red light like dried blood. A homeless man named Marcus, who had lived in that area for over 10 years, recounted that he heard a lullaby from underground, even though he was deaf in one ear after the war. "I can't hear music, but I can hear that. Because it doesn't need ears. It goes straight into the bones." At the same time, a 6-year-old child living nearby began drawing pictures with chalk on the sidewalk. Shapes no one taught. An empty cradle, a long-haired woman with no face, and a black shadow standing at the doorway with the words, "Mommy said don't let it out." The boy's mother asked, "Who is Mommy?" He replied, "She lives in the basement. She sings to the baby until it stops crying." In the following week, residents living near Hull House began to leave. Longtime families closed their doors, pasted protective charms, and moved to the suburbs. The remaining students disbanded the group. Loyola University suspended the Hull House survey program indefinitely. However, one person in the group, who was not named, sent a final recorded journal segment to their supervising professor. In it, the voice, clearly Harper's, said only one sentence: "The child has waited long enough. If mother doesn't call it home, it will find its own way." The curse was once limited to a room, a family, a mother. Now, it spread like an invisible smoke covering the community, then seeping into memory, into blood, and even into the silence between words. But what is more dangerous than any cry, groan. Or lullaby, is repetition. The first loop took place in Hull House. Not in the basement where the entity was summoned, but right on the third floor, in the abandoned old laundry room. A homeless man, who used to be a sound engineer, began living there. Every night, he hung a white towel on the drying rack and sat opposite it. He called it the hanging cradle. People did not pay attention to him until the recordings leaked out, the sound of a woman's lullaby. Identical to the recording found on the 1912 tape at Hull House, even though no equipment could record that sound. On social media, conspiracy theories began to spread. The hashtag the empty cradle spread widely. A Reddit group specializing in paranormal phenomena posted photos of the empty cradle appearing in many family videos filmed in different states. Although the videos were unrelated, a single frame, usually at the 17th or 41st second, showed the dark wooden cradle. People who watched more clips containing the cradle were at higher risk of insomnia, sleepwalking, or disappearing. The government did not speak out. But experts reassured. It was a mass hallucination. In Chicago alone, 3 cases of pregnant women began experiencing symptoms similar to Elena years ago. They dreamed the same dream, walking down a long, dark hallway. At the end of the path was a room containing an empty cradle, and a shadow silently singing a lullaby with a silent mouth. One of them, named Marlene, had a miscarriage of unknown cause in her 8th month. During the ultrasound, the doctor found no signs of fetal heartbeat from the 34th week. But the fetus continued to develop. Marlene said she heard a baby's voice calling from outside the uterus, "Mommy, let me out, but not all of me." After the miscarriage, Marlene was no longer lucid. She began drawing with her blood on the hospital room walls, round symbols, repeating shapes of hands with sharp claws, and the image of a mother with empty eyes. The hospital placed her under psychiatric observation. But a nurse there said that she heard a lullaby echoing from Marlene's room when no one was there. She claimed she heard it with both ears. But her left ear had been deaf since she was 10 years old. The next loop occurred at a high school. A geography class during a test suddenly simultaneously stopped writing. The entire class, consisting of 23 students, dropped their pens, then repeated the same sentence in an unconscious state. She rocked the cradle to keep the world asleep. When asked, no student remembered what they had said. But the classroom camera recorded it. Community psychologists argued that this was a phenomenon of mass hysteria. But one student, after reviewing the clip, drew an exact diagram of Elena's room in 1912, including the cradle placed at an angle in the corner and the semicircular window. That student had never been to Chicago. Religious researchers began returning to Hull House in secret. An unofficial group, calling themselves the Reclaimers, claimed that the curse could not be driven away, it could only be heard to the end. They began broadcasting simulated lullabies during secret rituals, held in the basements of abandoned churches. A leaked video from one of those rituals showed participants sitting in a circle around a cradle, eyes covered, mouths filled with candle wax, while a woman in a brown dress mumbled, "Mommy hears you now, Mommy won't be afraid." A faint tapping sound echoed from the cradle. The camera turned off. Elena, or something carrying her memory, had become a spiritual symbol. But not like the saints. She was the embodiment of delayed forgiveness, of maternal love that could not transcend. And in the latest recordings, discovered by a podcast group specializing in strange phenomena, the lullaby ended with a faint cracking sound. Like the sound of rotten wood snapping in two, Then silence. Absolute silence. The tape had no static, no background noise, only a sound void. There was no vibration on the sound spectrum. And that night, 3 children born at the same time in 3 different cities, Chicago, Boston, New Orleans, all had the same birthmark on their forehead, a pale black spiral, fading after 3 days. The mothers of all 3 children said the same sentence, without prior arrangement. I heard it call. But this time, I didn't answer. Her name was Sarah Mitchell. 32 years old. A social worker, living in Boston. No husband, no close friends, no social media, no belief in miracles. But she had one dream, to be a mother. After 2 miscarriages and a failed surgery, she applied to be a foster mother in the state's special fostering program. One day in early October, she was called to the city psychiatric hospital. A child, nameless. Born from an emergency case where the mother did not survive, needed special care. It was rejected by 3 previous families, for unknown reasons. The baby's name had not been given. Gender, male. Age, 3 weeks. What caught Sarah's attention was not the health condition, which was completely normal, but the psychological state. It did not cry. Nor did it sleep. It only stared intently at the ceiling and did not react to any sound, except for one kind, a lullaby with an ancient melody. The first time she held the baby, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. But she thought it was just a biological reflex. She named him Elliot, meaning, light of God, because she believed that, even if something was wrong, love could still fix it. But love could not stop the dreams. In the first 3 weeks, Sarah began having the same dreams. She walked into a dark room, where there was an old cradle and a woman standing with her back turned, long hair covering her back. The woman did not turn her head, but every time Sarah tried to approach her, she heard a whisper, "You are not its mother." Sarah took Elliot home, a small apartment at the end of the 3rd-floor hallway, in an old apartment building. In the first few days, she tried to establish a routine, feeding on time, placing the cradle near the window, playing soft music before bedtime. But Elliot still did not sleep. And by the 7th night, Elliot made his first cry. Not a newborn cry, but the sound of someone sobbing, as if being strangled. Sarah rushed into the room, turned on the light, but Elliot lay still. No tears. No sound. But the cradle pillow was soaked, not urine, but nose blood forming a small circular shape. Sarah called the doctor. They found no pathological signs. But they advised her to take Elliot for a neurological exam. She refused. Not everything abnormal is a disease. After that night, the items in the house began to shift slightly. Family photo frames spontaneously turned upside down. The wind chime hanging at the door suddenly emitted a rhythm like a lullaby. And every time Sarah walked into the bathroom, the steam on the mirror formed the shape of a small hand. One night, she heard Elliot speak. Not babbling, but a clear voice, in the tone of a 4-year-old child. Will you raise me forever? Don't leave me behind like my mother. Sarah dropped the bottle. She walked over, but Elliot was asleep. Or pretending to be asleep. The next morning, she called the child's record office. She wanted to know the identity of the deceased mother. But the file was locked, reason, federal agency request. From that moment, she began to doubt. Not about Elliot, but about herself. She began to see herself changing. Her voice was deeper in the morning. She woke up at unknown hours. Once she woke up standing in the middle of the living room, holding a silver holy medal, even though she had never worn anything like that before. In the mirror, her eyes were slightly darker, with faint purple circles as if from long-term sleep deprivation. But she did not feel tired. Then Elliot began to sing lullabies. No words. No music. Only rhythmic ascending and descending sounds. But when Sarah recorded and played it back, there was no sound. Only silence. As if Elliot was singing in a frequency only she could perceive. The climax came on the 21st night. She dreamed of rocking Elliot. But instead of holding him, she held a shape wrapped in black fabric. It had no face. No hands. But it was warm. Then the long-haired woman appeared, turning her face for the first time. It was Elena. No pupils. Only deep sockets. But her mouth moved. Without sound. But Sarah understood, my child has never rested in peace. Don't let it become a curse for you. Sarah woke up. Elliot had left the cradle. Crawling to the corner of the room, eyes wide open. Muttering a sentence in a language she did not recognize, but that felt strangely familiar. Elliot turned back to look at her, for the first time, and smiled. Not an infant's smile. Sarah hugged her child. Quietly. She understood. She could not return Elliot to the world. But she could do one thing. Teach him to love before learning how to manipulate. Because she did not want him to become part of the loop. She would do everything so that Elliot did not have to sing a lullaby to anyone else, except himself. Father Andrew Sullivan was one of the very few people who had contacted Elena before she disappeared from the Hull House community. When he was a young priest, he was assigned to the Western Labor District of the city to provide spiritual support to Irish and Italian immigrants. Elena was one of the first people to seek him out, not to confess, but to ask for help. I think something is wrong inside my belly. Not in a medical sense, but spiritually, she said, her hands clutching the silver medal tightly. He clearly remembered her eyes at that time, not the eyes of a fanatic, but the eyes of someone clinging to the last thread between themselves and the living world. After Elena disappeared with her child, Father Andrew returned to Hull House twice hoping to investigate. But each time he encountered obstacles, the gatekeeper said Elena was not on the list. No one saw her move in, no one received letters from her. He began to doubt his memory, until he received an anonymous envelope sent to the church. Inside was a hand-drawn picture. An empty cradle with the scrawled words, "It doesn't want to sleep. It wants to be sung to." In 1982, Father Andrew retired. He moved to a small monastery near the edge of the forest in Vermont, living in seclusion. But every night, he heard sounds echoing through the forest, not loud, not clear, but rhythmic, like a repeating lullaby in his head. He thought he was suffering from neurological degeneration. Until one night someone knocked on the monastery door. A young woman, holding a newborn in her arms. Her face was distraught, but her eyes were bright. She did not give her name. Only said one sentence, "Your child is singing the lullaby of another mother. Can you help?" Father Sullivan hesitated. But when the child was placed in his hands, a chilling sensation ran down his spine, exactly like the first time he met Elena. He performed the ritual, not according to books, but according to memory. He read excerpts from the Psalms that were not in the current ritual. He placed the silver medal on the child's forehead. It was silent. Then it smiled. Not a child's smile. A few days later, he wrote a single passage in his journal. It doesn't need to be saved. It needs to know who summoned it. That winter, Father Andrew passed away in his monastery room. On his wooden desk, the police found another drawing, glued to the wall with candle wax. In it was a picture of a cradle suspended in the forest, and a line handwritten in charcoal. One circle of lullaby, one circle of blood, one circle with no way out. Father Andrew's story was never publicized, but a copy of his journal was preserved in the monastery library. It was not until 2022 that a theology student discovered it and published it on an ancient religious forum. It was from there that the online community began linking the bizarre cases at Hull House with the lullabies, and the official investigation was reopened. The student's name was Marcus Lorne, and he was the nephew of Davis, the cameraman who disappeared in the Hull House basement. No one knows exactly what exists beneath Hull House, but fragmented records, from 1912 to 2025. From priests, residents, researchers, and even those who were haunted, all point to one thing: not ghosts, not spirits, but an incomplete entity. It has no stable shape, no clear goal. But it knows how to be born, repeat, and continue. Not with flesh and blood, but with memory. The Hull House basement was once a shelter in the early 20th century, where immigrants hid from violence, war, and famine. But no one noticed that, during the first 10 years, 6 pregnant women had lived there, and none of them were able to give birth. Some died during childbirth. Some disappeared. Some went insane. In the journal of a Polish nurse who lived there in 1914, there was a passage: "The children do not want to leave their mothers' wombs. They are waiting for something. They do not want to cry the first cry, because that will wake the thing up." The thing, the only name remaining in the records, was described as a shadow in the shape of longing. Not a black shadow, but a void formed from things humans left behind: resentment, unfinished vows, children who never got a name. Marcus Lorne, after finding Father Andrew's journal, began researching Hull House not only as a theologian, but as someone piecing together the broken threads of his family's past. He found the last raw tape from his uncle's camera, Davis, and when he slowed down each frame, he discovered a fleeting shape, unclear, asymmetrical, but it was bending down, as if listening to a lullaby. The deeper he dug, Marcus realized, Hull House was not haunted. It was a gate. But it did not lead to hell, but to the place without a name. And the thing growing beneath it was not a creature, but a pattern, a rhythm, a cycle of distorted faith. He returned to Chicago, tracing old maps. He discovered Hull House was built on 3 layers of foundation: an old 18th century church, an abandoned monastery, and a wooden cellar, where women accused of witchcraft were executed in 1693. But what haunted him most was the half-burnt wooden carving, found in the wall of Hull House. On it, the only remaining image was a woman holding her belly, but on her belly was not a child, but a small wooden cradle, locked tight. At this time, Sarah Mitchell, Elliot's foster mother, contacted Marcus. She said, "I think I am raising the thing you are looking for. But I don't know if I'm raising it, or if it is raising me." They arranged to meet. But the night before the meeting, Sarah disappeared from the apartment. The door was not broken. There were no signs of struggle. But the hallway camera recorded the final image. Sarah carrying Elliot walked out of the room, went straight to the basement stairs. And the door closed behind her, never opening again. Marcus decided to enter Hull House one last time, bringing a camera, a voice recorder, and the transcribed lyrics of Elena's old lullaby. He walked down to the basement, reading those words, not hoping to cast out, but to listen for an answer. In the darkness, a voice echoed back, "Not everyone is chosen to sing lullabies. But if you have spoken, you must sing to the end." And then, he saw something moving slowly in the corner of the basement. Not a creature, but memory. Of all the mothers, all the children, the loops that had not closed. The thing did not look at him, but he felt he was being watched. Watched by a silence that spanned centuries. No one remembers exactly how the lullaby began. It has no fixed lyrics, no background music, no common melody. But once someone hears it, through a recording, a dream, an echo, or even just through imagination, it will not leave their mind anymore. It continues, endlessly, like a parasite clinging to the deepest unconscious mind. And worst of all, some people begin to sing it back, unconsciously. Children, the elderly, the dying. The lullaby does not come from the mouth. It appears in behavior, gestures, hand movements. The vibration in the throat during sleep. A woman named Brenda, a retired nurse living in Milwaukee, was recorded rocking a doll for 3 hours without blinking, singing a lullaby no one recognized. When family members tried to wake her, she only said, "It hasn't slept yet. If I stop singing, it will cry." Doctors diagnosed her with a neurological disorder. But in the security video at the nursing home, that night, the sound of the lullaby, repeating in the recording, could be seen causing small fluctuations on the screen. A sound wave. A structure. A symbol. Not random. A group of MIT students, curious about this phenomenon, began analyzing the signal of the lullaby on the sound spectrum and found that it had a structure similar to a reversed heartbeat, but not human. At the same time, a research group in California found patients in a deep coma, when the lullaby was played, a simulated version using a machine voice, showed micro-movements around their eyelids, as if reacting to a familiar sound. A patient woke up after 5 years, saying the first words, "I heard Mom." But his grandmother had passed away when he was young. In Philadelphia, a newborn baby, in a completely soundproof delivery room, suddenly stopped crying when the room lights were turned off. And when the doctor came to check, the camera recorded the baby vibrating its lips in a regular rhythm. Not sucking, not a newborn reflex, but singing. A female doctor burst into tears. She had lost her child during birth. She said, "That's the lullaby I didn't get to sing to my child. But it is singing it back to me." The story spread quickly on the Whisper Archives forum, which specializes in archiving hidden phenomena. From there, the lullabies began to be compiled. Each version had differences in syllables, but shared the same emotion, a sorrow that had no place to hide. Marcus Lorne, now the only survivor who stepped into Hull House and remained lucid, recorded his entire experience. He said, "The thing I heard was not sound. It was the sigh of souls who never fully became mothers. They were not calling their children. They were calling their own names, one last time. And the lullaby did not stop when no one sang anymore. It continued to live in forgotten things, an unwashed old shirt, a blurred photo, a cradle without an owner. It lived in every void where love was once present, then withdrawn. It did not need anyone to sing. Only someone who had lost. And in Marcus's final dream, he saw Elena. She no longer had a physical form. Only a back, bent over a cradle. But he knew it was her. And he heard himself singing. Not by choice. Not in his familiar voice. But in the voice of his mother, who died when he was 10 years old. Because in that lullaby, no one is themselves. No one belongs to anyone else. Only the pain is real. And it does not stop. Sarah's small bathroom, where the foggy mirror had many times reflected the shadow of a tiny hand, began to transform into an intermediary space, where memory, reflection, and fear merged. It was no longer a place where she washed her face, brushed her hair, or asked simple questions about tomorrow. Now, every time light passed across the mirror's surface, a very small whisper echoed, unclear words, no specific meaning, but filled with a very human emotion, regret. Sarah thought she was imagining things. She tried to live normally. Taking care of Elliot, going to the supermarket, reading children's books, setting bedtime on time. But Elliot did not react like other children. The boy preferred to sit in the dark. Never cried because of hunger, did not need a lullaby to sleep. But every time Sarah looked in the mirror, she did not see herself. She saw a different version, an older mother, messy hair, sunken eyes, with empty hands. One night, she tried covering the mirror with a towel. The voice stopped. But Elliot cried, for the first time in weeks, and cried continuously until the towel was removed. Sarah began to fear her own reflection. And strangely, some nights, Elliot crawled to the mirror, stood silently looking, then chuckled, as if playing with someone on the other side. She decided to take the mirror down. Behind the mirror was a smooth wall. But in the middle of the wall, there was a small circle drawn in charcoal, resembling the drawing Marcus had sent her in an email from Father Andrew's journal. A circle, inside which a cradle was locked with chains. Sarah began to lose sleep. She dreamed of Elena sitting behind the mirror, singing a lullaby to a child in a language no one taught. She saw Elliot growing faster than time, speaking words a child had never learned. One day, the boy asked, "If you are not my mother, why don't you return me to the right place?" Sarah called Marcus. They met in the old religious library, where copies of Hull House records were kept. Marcus brought the original audio file, Elena's lullaby, cleaned of noise and embedded with alpha waves for analysis. When he played it, both of them heard something no one dared to say out loud. Beneath the lullaby, there was a child's voice, replying, repeating, harmonizing. Mirrors do not reflect. Mirrors store. Sarah understood. She returned home, removed all the mirrors in the house, and threw them away. But the whispering did not disappear. It followed her in the sound of running water, in the glass of the microwave door, in the car's rear-view mirror. Any surface that could reflect, could become the mouth of the past. The climax was on a rainy night, when Sarah heard her name being called. Not an adult voice, but the voice of a child, who was never born. Mommy. 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 I didn't get to open my eyes. Mommy didn't get to see me. She looked at Elliot. The boy was still sleeping. But the mirror on the wardrobe blurred. And then, a face appeared, not clear, not fierce, but instead, very sorrowful. It was her, Sarah, but a version who had never had a child. A lost woman. Still waiting for the child who never arrived. Sarah walked closer. Each step was a call. Each breath was a part of memory flowing back. And when she touched the mirror, she did not feel glass, but human skin, cold, soft, and trembling. The voice in the mirror was no longer a lullaby, but a question: if I am not your child, will you still love me? And Sarah burst into tears. For the first time, not out of fear, but out of compassion. Because she knew, what she was taking care of, no matter where it came from, was once a child. And no child should grow up in the silence of a mirror. On the other side of the mirror, a small hand was placed on the inside surface. Sarah placed her hand opposite it. And no one knew which side was real. Marcus received a message from a strange email address. If you want to know the thing that is singing, come to St. Barlow Church, 11 p.m. Alone. No title. No sender name. But attached was a very short audio file, only 3 seconds, recording a child's laughter mixed with the familiar lullaby. Not Elena's old version, but a new version. St. Barlow was a small church belonging to the Southern Chicago Diocese, abandoned since 1991 after a fire of unknown cause. The dome had collapsed, the walls were charred black. Plants grew over the cracks in the stone. But the strange thing was, according to city records, the church was completely demolished in 1995. It should not still exist. However, when Marcus arrived, the building was still standing, dilapidated but intact. As if someone had rebuilt every stone from memory. He walked in, his weak flashlight beam shining through the dust. On the altar, there was no statue of Christ. Instead, there was a wooden cradle, old, worn, and empty. On the stone wall behind it, a familiar symbol was drawn in black charcoal, a circle with a locked cradle. And around it, hundreds of signatures, scrawled, childish, but all were names of children who were never born. Marcus placed his hand on the cradle's frame. It was cold as ice. And from the end of the church, a woman's voice echoed. Very slowly. Very clearly, no one sang to my child. I had to sing it myself. But I no longer have a mouth. He turned around. There was no one. But the statue of the Virgin Mary that was once broken now reappeared, made of ashes. And in her hands, not the Christ child, but a void, swirling deep into the stone. The singing began to echo from the walls. Not one voice, but hundreds. Each song, each syllable, carried a specific pain. I was born on a rainy night. I didn't get a name. I didn't get to see the light. My mother stopped singing. Marcus collapsed. He felt the memory being pulled from him, not by force, but by compassion. He saw his mother, who had once sung to him, and then her voice also joined that chorus. No one was screaming. Only singing. Very gently. Very persistently. In a panic. He took out the recording of Elena's lullaby and played it. The other voices stopped. For a moment, the church was so quiet he could hear his own heartbeat. Then from the darkness, a child emerged. It was not Elliot. It was not anyone's child, but a composite of forgotten children. It had Sarah's eyes, Elena's hair, and Davis's laugh. It did not speak, only approached Marcus and placed its hand on his chest. "Your heart is still beating, so sing a lullaby," it whispered. And he sang, not because he wanted to, but because no one else could remember the original lullaby anymore. The broken glass hanging at the end of the church gradually reflected both their images, but not according to the logic of light, but according to the logic of memory. One person sings, one person listens. One person sings a lullaby, one person was never born. That night, the church burned down again. But no one reported the fire. No one came to the scene. And the next day, the church disappeared from the map again. Only the 3-second recording remained. The sound of a child laughing. Then silence. 3 days after the St. Barlow church fire, a 3-year-old girl named Clara in Buffalo, New York, suddenly developed a high fever and spoke in delirium all night. The strange thing was that in her delirium, the girl sang a lullaby in an ancient extinct language, identified as Proto-Celtic, a language that had never been completely recorded. Clara's mother, a high school teacher, confirmed that the family had no Celtic roots. No one had ever sung Clara a similar lullaby. The only unusual thing was, she had visited a photo exhibition about Hull House 2 months ago. In the exhibition album, there was a blurred old photo, capturing the wooden cradle and the charcoal-locked circle on the stone wall. Clara had stared intently at that photo for a long time. The wound, not on the body, but in the community's memory, began to open. In Iowa, a 70-year-old man claimed to be Elena's son. He lived in seclusion, no birth certificate, no clear identity. He handwritten a thick journal of hundreds of pages, recording the call from underground and the pain in the mother's womb that never stopped. Doctors confirmed he suffered from severe dissociative disorder, but what was difficult to explain was, there were long scars in his small intestine as if it had been cut, sewn back from the inside, but there were no signs of abdominal surgery on the outside. At the Oregon State Mental Hospital, a female patient who lost her child during childbirth in 1987 began talking to the wall as if teaching someone how to speak. "The child doesn't need to sing well," she said. "Just sing long enough so that people remember it once existed." Marcus, after the incident at St. Barlow, fell into a temporary mute state. No one could explain the reason. His voice did not disappear due to vocal cord injury, but because his brain stopped activating the Broca area, the language center. Doctors noted, the patient seems unwilling to speak, fearing that every word spoken will become a part of the eternal lullaby. Sarah came to see him. She brought the old mirror, wrapped in a towel. She said, "I think something is still left in Elliot. But not to harm. It needs someone to talk to. Not with words, but with memory." They decided to return to Hull House, even though the government had sealed it off and completely erased the address from the official map. But when they arrived, instead of a pile of rubble, they saw a newly built playground, with a tall wall and a solitary swing. Elliot ran over. The boy looked at the swing, then whispered a sentence no one taught him, "There used to be wind here. But the wind no longer sings." Sarah knelt down, hugging her child. She knew, that wound, the wound of generations forgotten, cut off from the lullaby, was trying to heal. But not by erasure, but by recognition. That night, Elliot drew a picture with white chalk on the wall, a woman sitting singing a lullaby to a child, but the cradle was a door. The boy asked his mother, "If I step into that, will you come with me?" Sarah did not answer. But she took the mirror out of the towel, placing it on the wall where the door was drawn. In the reflection, they no longer saw themselves, but saw all the people who were once forgotten, who sang lullabies but were not sung back to. And that wound, the invisible void in the community's heart, gently closed. Not completely, but enough to stop bleeding. Somewhere, someone began to sing, unclear for whom. To whom, just simply singing. 3 weeks after the trip back to Hull House, Elliot began to change. Not in a frightening way, but in a way that made Sarah feel uneasy because it was too calm. The boy slept on time, ate well, no longer looked in the mirror or sang strange tunes. But when Sarah checked the night baby monitor, she saw Elliot sitting up, facing the wall where the mirror used to hang, and whispering, "I haven't gone anywhere. I'm just waiting for the door to open." Sarah tried to contact Marcus but couldn't. He had left the city after regaining his ability to speak, leaving behind a single letter: "There are doors not meant for the living. If I step through, don't call me back." Included was a drawing of a cradle superimposed on the Hull House diagram, the intersection located right below the basement, where Elena gave birth. The door Elliot mentioned was not on the wall. It was in the dream. The boy began drawing more pictures, all were sealed door frames, with hundreds of eyes behind them. When asked who taught him to draw, Elliot replied, "No one. But I remembered." Sarah took her child to a pediatric psychologist. After a few sessions, the doctor noted, the child carries memories that are not his. Possibly a phenomenon of spiritual memory transfer. But Sarah understood deeper, this was no longer an isolated phenomenon. It was a cycle. One night, Elliot woke up, sat up and said, "Mom, I need you to sing. If you don't sing, the door will open in the wrong direction." Sarah sang. No words. No melody. Only slow breathing rhythms, the way she used to sing to Elliot when he was a baby. In that moment, nothing happened. But at that exact time, all the clocks in the house stopped at exactly 3:33 a.m. The next day, Sarah found the drawings Elliot had drawn, the cradle, the door, the mirror. She stacked them together like a spiritual map. The focal point was Elliot. She realized, the child was not haunted, but the key keeper. All the loops, every song, every memory, all came to him to be shaped, to be closed. Sarah decided to experiment. She recorded a lullaby in her own voice, played it backward, and inserted Elliot's heartbeat rhythms from when he was in the womb. She had recorded them using a fetal Doppler machine. When she played the audio in the room, Elliot did not react. But the wind began to rise, in a house with no open windows. The drawing on the wall peeled off a layer, revealing a circle carved into the wall behind it. No one had ever touched it. But Elliot said, "That's the lock. If Mom touches it and is not afraid, the door will no longer need to open." Sarah did as he said. She placed her hand on the carving. In her head, Elena's lullaby echoed. But it was no longer scary, but gentle. She understood, the lullaby was not to put the child to sleep, but to keep the world from shattering. The next morning, Elliot no longer mentioned the door. But Sarah knew, it was still there. Not open. not closed, but just waiting for the right person to touch it. And somewhere, in the city, other children began drawing pictures of the cradle. No one taught them. No one understood. But they all whispered the same sentence: if mommy sings long enough, I won't disappear. That door never truly opened. But people had begun to learn how to close it, with love. That night, at 2:17 a.m., Sarah woke up amidst a faint whistling sound in the sealed house. She walked out to the living room. Elliot was still asleep. But on the wall, where the circular carving used to be, was a very small crack. She touched it. It was cold as deeply buried stone. And at the beginning of the crack was a tiny line of text, as if written with a finger stained in dried blood: I never wanted to go. I just wanted Mom to listen. It was not from Elliot. In the same night, across the United States, dozens of women woke up at the same hour, all who had lost children, who had pregnancies that did not complete, who had sung lullabies in their imagination. They all heard the same lullaby, wordless, and all dreamed of the same place, a round stone room, with a wooden cradle in the center and a faceless statue of a woman standing guard. Police in New Orleans recorded an emergency call. A woman who had just given birth prematurely after a car accident claimed she had seen the lost baby looking for its mother in the hospital hallway. When doctors asked for details, she said through tears, "It's not my child, but I heard its voice singing." Hospital cameras recorded, after she was anesthetized. The operating room door opened several times. No one entered or left, but each time, the monitors emitted a vibration signal resembling the lullaby rhythm. In California, a group of women who were members of a miscarriage support group organized a weekend therapy session. When they collectively recounted the dream of the stone room, one woman lighting a candle burst into tears and said, "I heard my mother in there. Not my child. My mother. She sang to me one last time before she died in the war." The others unanimously admitted they heard not only their children's voices, but a chain of generations, female voices singing lullabies to each other through the generations. Sarah, realizing what was happening, wrote letters inviting the mothers, through forums, social media, support groups, to her small house. They did not need to bring anything. Only their voices. That night, 11 women came. They sat in a circle around Elliot. No one spoke. Only closed their eyes. Each person began to sing a lullaby, in their own way, in their own language. The singing was slow, intertwining, creating an invisible net covering the room. Elliot opened his eyes, not afraid, only sighed and smiled. "This is the first time I heard a lullaby that wasn't lonely," he whispered. The crack in the wall slowly closed. Not completely. But it was no longer cold. When everyone left, the oldest woman in the group, Mrs. Martha, 87 years old, who gave birth during a time of chaos and lost the baby after birth, stayed behind last. She said to Sarah, "Your child might be the end point. But it could also be the starting point. If we continue to sing lullabies, not out of fear, but out of memory, then all those children will know they were not forgotten." And then she bent down, placed a kiss on Elliot's forehead. The faceless statue in the mother's dreams gradually gained features, not with stone, but with collective memory. Each lullaby was a touch. Each tear was a restoration. That night was recorded in the Whisper archives as the Night of the Mothers. There were no specific supernatural events. No evidence. But after that night, the number of cases of children with insomnia, the number of repeating dreams about the closed door, the number of recordings with static in hospitals, all gradually decreased. And no one sang the old lullaby anymore. They sang a different one, gentler, not to rock the children to sleep, but to say, "You are still here. And so am I." 2 weeks after, the Night of the Mothers, a phenomenon quietly spread within old religious communities, places that had recorded cases of unexplained stillbirths since the 1940s. Parishes, evangelical groups, and small churches, especially in the Midwest and southern United States, simultaneously announced the restoration of the memorial ceremony for nameless children. The event, which was previously considered superstition, was now organized with a new ritual: no prayers, no mourning. Only music. Not hymns. Not country music. But a series of lullabies, recorded from mothers, grandmothers, or women who had miscarried, played from old speakers, AM radios, or even old cassette players. In a small church in Kansas. Now I hear them calling me back. His mother fainted. His father, an atheist, began attending services again, but only sat quietly, not praying. Sarah, meanwhile, began writing. Not books. Not a journal. But fragmented passages, lullabies, echoes, songs of the mothers she had met. She did not intend to publish. But the manuscript spread on its own. A small blog named Voices from the Womb republished a few segments, and it immediately spread to Reddit, then TikTok. Young people began remixing those lullabies into ambient, lo-fi, and even techno, but not for trends. But because they said, "It reminds me of my mother," even though my mother never sang. An anthropology professor at Yale wrote a research paper calling this phenomenon the resurrection of memory through sound without a sender. He argued, there are lullabies that cannot find the original source. No one remembers who sang them, but they are still transmitted as if they have always existed. They do not belong to an individual. He wrote, but to the void. Eliot did not speak during that time. But he drew hundreds of drawings, each one a mother holding a child, but the child is always a white circle, no face, no hands, no sound. He gave Sarah one drawing with color. The mother in the drawing was singing, and the child had very large ears. To hear in time before mom stops singing, Eliot explained. At the same time, Marcus sent a postcard to Sarah. Only 3 words, it remembered. And a hand-drawn symbol, a circle with a cradle carving, but this time, unlocked. That night, Sarah heard Eliot murmuring in his sleep, "Mom doesn't need to sing anymore. The others will continue singing." She sat up, looked at her child, then looked out the window. The lights in the neighbors' houses were still on. From afar, there was a singing echoing, unclear where it came from, but gentle, thin as a thread. A light breeze wafted through the window gap. In the wind was the smell of perfume. And a voice whispered, "Thank you for not forgetting our names." The final recognition was not an apology, not atonement, but the smallest echo in a mother's heart. You once existed, even if only in a lullaby. Whisper Horror Channel has told many stories about ancient tombs, cursed hills, whispers from the other side. But this story, although it began as a horrifying sentence for a mother, ended not with blood, not with screams, but with silence. Because somewhere, A person is singing a lullaby to their child for the first time after years of not daring to be a mother. Because somewhere, an old woman is whispering to the baby she lost in 1963, calling its name as if she had never forgotten. Because somewhere, a young girl is listening to the lo-fi remix track from TikTok. But this time she doesn't feel haunted, only warm. Elena is no longer mentioned in hospital records. Hull House was completely demolished. No one found any mirror fragments. But the images in Elliot's drawings, the children with large ears, the faceless mothers, the cradles with circular carvings, are still used by child therapists as a tool to unlock buried memories. Sarah continued to write, but not under her real name. She used the pseudonym, The Last Lullaby. Each piece she posted ended with the same sentence. You may not believe it, but if you have ever sung a lullaby to someone, try listening. Where did that lullaby go? The final night in this script is a night where nothing happened. No child screamed. No door opened. No ghostly lullaby echoed. Only a young mother, holding her sleeping baby, sitting by the window, whispering a song to herself. And because of that, we want to say, this is not a horror story. This is a forgotten lullaby, sung again. Whisper Horror Channel thanks you for staying with us until the end of the story. If you feel a part of you was also forgotten, please press like. If you think someone needs to hear this story, please share. And if you want to continue hearing the echoes from places no one dares to mention anymore, please subscribe and turn on the bell. What do you think? Can a lullaby save a soul, even after it no longer exists?